It was supposed to be a simple flight, but within minutes of takeoff, a brand new Boeing 737 was shaking itself apart at 28,000 feet. Flames licked from one of its engines. Inside, passengers screamed as smoke poured through the vents. In the cockpit, two pilots stared at a wall of flashing lights, uncertain which engine was dying and which one was still keeping them alive. One decision would decide who lived and who didn't. January 8th, 1989. British Midland Flight 92 took off from London's Heathrow Airport, bound for Belfast. A short evening flight, a routine trip for 126 people, but that night, routine turned into terror. Captain Kevin Hunt and First Officer David McClelland had no warning that their lives were about to change forever. The Boeing 737-400 they were flying was new, so new that it carried systems neither man had truly mastered. Yet, as the plane climbed through thick winter air, everything felt perfect, smooth, silent, calm. Inside the cabin, laughter drifted between rows. Business travelers sipped coffee. A mother soothed her child. Outside, the orange lights of London faded into a sea of darkness. The hum of the engines felt reassuring, steady, powerful, alive. At 1952, the plane pierced through a layer of clouds. Flight attendants began preparing for service. In the cockpit, the autopilot was engaged. Everything looked normal, but just 8 minutes later, normal disappeared. A thunderous explosion ripped through the aircraft. The cabin jolted violently. Drinks flew into the air. Passengers gasped. One man shouted, "We're losing power." The right engine began to tear itself apart, sending vibration through every bolt, every seat, every heartbeat on board. The crew had seconds to react. Warning lights blinked red across the instrument panel. The smell of burning oil filled the air. Captain Hunt gripped the controls as the plane began to shudder. "Which one is it?" McClelland asked. Their eyes darted between screens, searching for answers. And then, silence. The captain reached forward and shut down an engine. The shaking stopped. Relief, calm. For a moment, everyone thought they'd survived the scare. But they hadn't, because the engine they had just turned off was the good one. Down below, the English countryside waited in darkness. The lights of Leicester glimmered faintly in the distance. No one on board British Midland Flight 92 knew it yet, but they were gliding toward disaster. The calm didn't last long. Just minutes after the crew shut down the left engine, the aircraft began to tremble again. It wasn't violent this time, just a faint vibration, like the sky itself was holding its breath. But in that subtle shudder hid a fatal truth. The right engine, the real problem, was still running, and it was dying fast. Inside the cabin, passengers exchanged nervous glances. The smell of smoke lingered. The air felt heavy. Some whispered prayers. Others tried to stay calm, convincing themselves it was just turbulence. A few could see out the window, faint flickers of orange light still coming from the right side. But no one dared say the words out loud. In the cockpit, Captain Kevin Hunt and First Officer David McClelland were fighting confusion. The Boeing 737-400 was one of the newest jets in British Midland's fleet. Its engines were different. The instruments looked different. The new vibration gauges gave readings they hadn't seen before. Their training hadn't prepared them for this. They truly believed they'd shut down the damaged engine. They truly believed they'd made the right call. But every second that passed brought them closer to disaster. The right engine, starved of power, began to disintegrate. The turbine blades, glowing red hot, were tearing themselves apart from the inside. The cockpit displays flickered. The aircraft's altitude began to drop ever so slightly. But the pilots didn't notice at first. They were too focused on stabilizing what they thought was their only working engine. At 20:05, Captain Hunt radioed air traffic control. "Mayday, Mayday. British Midland, 92. We've had an engine failure. Request diversion to East Midlands. The controller's voice came through calm and steady. Roger, British Midland, 92. Turn right, heading 100. Descend to flight level 150. The descent began. The plane started losing altitude, slowly at first. The crew reassured the passengers that everything was under control. Just a precautionary landing, one attendant said, with a forced smile. But deep down, everyone could feel the tension thickening in the air. As the lights of Leicester appeared below, the aircraft lined up for an emergency landing at East Midlands Airport. It was a cold, moonlit night. The ground seemed close enough to touch. Passengers clung to the armrests, waiting for impact, for safety, for anything that would end the nightmare. And then, just as the runway came into sight, the right engine, the last remaining source of thrust, exploded. A thunderous roar shook the cabin. Pieces of metal tore through the wing. The cockpit went dark. Every system screamed in alarm. The plane began to drop, fast. Captain Hunt pushed the controls forward, desperately trying to keep the nose level. The stick trembled in his hands. "We've lost both engines," McClellan shouted. There was no time to think, no time to react, only instinct. The Boeing 737 was now a silent glider, sinking through the night sky toward the countryside below. And on the ground, drivers on the M1 motorway looked up, seeing a dark shape descending toward them, its lights flickering, its engines dead. The flight that was supposed to last less than an hour had just turned into a fight for survival. The moment the right engine failed completely, the illusion shattered. The pilot's worst fear came true. Both engines were now silent. The aircraft was gliding, powerless, through the cold January night. In the cockpit, the realization hit like a punch. The wrong engine had been shut down. Captain Kevin Hunt stared at the instruments in disbelief. The readings made no sense. The left engine, the one they'd turned off, was fine all along. The right engine, the one they'd left running, was destroyed. Every second of calm they'd felt earlier had been built on a fatal misunderstanding. They had made the wrong choice, and now there was no undoing it. The first officer tried to restart the left engine. He flipped the switches, adjusted the fuel levers, and waited. Nothing. The engine refused to come back to life. The 737 had become a 60-ton glider, descending fast, with only gravity pulling it down. In the cabin, the tension broke into chaos. People began to cry, to pray, to whisper their last words. A mother held her child against her chest. A businessman clenched his briefcase like it could somehow protect him. Flight attendants shouted over the noise, urging passengers to brace. Outside, through the cockpit windows, the dark English countryside was rushing up to meet them. The lights of the M1 motorway glowed like a silver ribbon, cutting through the night. The East Midlands Airport was only a few miles away, but it might as well have been a world apart. The crew pulled the nose up slightly, trying to stretch their glide. For a few agonizing moments, it seemed they might just make it. The runway lights shimmered in the distance, so close they could see their reflection on the glass. Then the stall warning blared. A shrill, desperate alarm filled the cockpit. The wings were losing lift. Airspeed dropped. The stick began to shudder violently. Hunt gritted his teeth, forcing the controls forward, trying to coax more speed. But the engines were dead. The aircraft's fate was sealed. Brace, echoed through the cabin. Passengers bent forward, hands over their heads. Time seemed to freeze. At 20:24, just 500 yards short of the runway, British Midland Flight 92 clipped the embankment of the M1 motorway. The impact tore the fuselage apart. The left wing sheared off, the right engine ripped free, and the nose slammed into the ground with devastating force. A ball of fire lit up the night sky. On the motorway, drivers skidded to a halt, staring in horror at the wreckage blazing beside the road. The aircraft had broken into several sections. Smoke, screams, and confusion filled the air. But through that inferno, survivors began to move. People were climbing out of shattered fuselage, dazed, burned, but alive. Miraculously, out of 126 people on board, 79 survived. Many owed their lives to quick-thinking passengers and cabin crew who guided others out through torn sections of the fuselage. But 47 never made it. As emergency crews rushed to the scene, one thing became clear. This was not just an accident. It was a chain of human error, misunderstanding, and tragic coincidence. And soon, investigators would uncover the heartbreaking truth behind the disaster. How a simple mistake in the cockpit brought down a nearly brand new jet. In those final moments before impact, time seemed to slow. The cockpit was filled with warning alarms, and the dull groan of the wind rushing over the powerless aircraft. Captain Kevin Hunt's hands were locked on the controls. His co-pilot, David McClelland, called out altitude readings that fell faster and faster. Their hearts pounded in sync with the aircraft's final descent. They were fighting physics now, trying to keep a 737 in the air, with nothing left to give. Every pilot fears this silence. No thrust, no response, just the howl of air past the windows and the growing awareness that gravity has taken control. The East Midlands runway lights were so close, they could almost count them, but without power, every second meant losing another 100 feet of altitude. Captain Hunt kept the nose steady, refusing to let panic take over. His voice was calm, clipped, measured, professionalism born from years in the cockpit. "We'll make it," he said softly. Maybe to himself, maybe to the passengers he couldn't see. McClelland worked the controls beside him, trying one last time to restart the left engine. It coughed once, then silence again. Inside the cabin, passengers braced for what they already sensed was coming. The smell of smoke, mixed with jet fuel. A few whispered prayers filled the air. The flight attendants shouted commands, voices trembling but strong. "Brace, heads down, stay down." The words cut through the panic, echoing through rows of terrified faces. Down below, headlights on the M1 motorway swerved as drivers spotted a dark shape descending out of the night. A Boeing 737, gliding silently, its landing lights flickering. Some drivers slammed their brakes. Others ran from their cars, screaming as the aircraft hurtled toward the embankment. At 2024, the jet struck the ground. The first impact tore through the fuselage. Metal screamed. The tail section ripped away. The left wing sheared off, scattering debris across the motorway. Flames erupted instantly, lighting up the cold night sky like daylight. For a moment, the world was nothing but noise explosions, cries, collapsing metal. Then came the silence. Only the crackle of fire remained. Miraculously, there was movement inside the wreckage. Survivors were pulling themselves from twisted seats, crawling through broken panels, gasping for air. Some stumbled onto the grass, faces blackened by smoke. Others helped strangers, dragging them away from the burning fuselage. Despite the chaos, the human instinct to save one another overpowered fear. Fire crews from nearby Leicester arrived within minutes. The sight before them was unreal. A Boeing torn in half beside a busy motorway, flames roaring into the night. They worked furiously, battling the inferno, cutting through wreckage, pulling out survivors one by one. In the cockpit, both pilots were alive but trapped. The impact had crushed their section forward. Rescue teams fought to free them, shouting through the twisted metal. When they were finally pulled out, both men were conscious, but silent. They already knew what had gone wrong. Captain Hunt's first words to investigators would haunt him for years. "We shut down the wrong engine." That single sentence would define one of the most tragic lessons in modern aviation. A reminder that even the most skilled, experienced crew can be misled by confusion, pressure, and human instinct. The wreckage of British Midland Flight 92 burned through the night. Flames rose against the black sky as rescue workers searched through the shattered fuselage. The sound of sirens echoed down the M1 motorway. The air smelled of fuel, smoke, and cold steel. Inside what was left of the plane, the cries of survivors slowly faded into silence. By morning, television cameras lined the motorway. The world woke up to a headline that stunned Britain. The plane that wouldn't climb. Reporters spoke in hushed tones as investigators picked through the debris, trying to piece together what had happened. The preliminary findings came fast. The right engine, the number 2, had suffered a fan blade failure. It was a known issue with this new Boeing 737-400 model. But the tragedy wasn't just mechanical. It was human. The crew had misidentified the problem and shut down the wrong engine. The left one, the only one still capable of saving them. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't carelessness. It was confusion. The instruments on the 737-400 were different from the older 737s. The vibration gauges had been repositioned. The display indications were misleading. Under pressure, in the heat of the emergency, the crew relied on instinct, experience from older systems, and that experience betrayed them. When investigators replayed the cockpit voice recorder, one chilling detail stood out. In the first seconds of the explosion, a passenger in the cabin had clearly seen flames from the right engine, but the pilots, unable to see outside, had no way of knowing. They trusted what the instruments told them, and the instruments told a lie. The final report was brutal in its honesty. It concluded that the pilot's decision to shut down the wrong engine was understandable, but fatal. Yet out of that heartbreak came change. British Midland completely overhauled its pilot training. Boeing redesigned its engine displays and procedures. Airlines introduced new protocols for dealing with vibration warnings and engine failures. The industry learned because it had to, because 47 people had died, to prove a point that should never have needed proving. Captain Kevin Hunt and First Officer David McClelland survived but carried the weight of the tragedy for the rest of their lives. In interviews years later, they both said the same thing. If they could trade their survival to bring back those lost passengers, they would. Among the survivors, many spoke of heroism, passengers helping each other, flight attendants refusing to leave until everyone they could reach was out. The human spirit, even in the darkest moment, refused to die. In the end, British Midland Flight 92 became more than just another crash. It became a mirror reflecting humanity's greatest strength and greatest flaw: the courage to act under pressure and the capacity to make deadly mistakes. The lessons written in blood that night still guide aviation today. Every checklist, every simulator, every emergency procedure carries a piece of Flight 92's story. Because in aviation, safety is never born from perfection. It's built from tragedy, from the echoes of those who didn't make it home. And that's why, more than 3 decades later, pilots still remember the night a Boeing 737 lost its climb, and the world learned what it truly means to fly on the edge between control and catastrophe. If stories like this move you, if they remind you how fragile life can be and how every mistake can rewrite history, then don't let this story fade. Hit subscribe so you never miss the untold truths behind aviation's darkest nights. Click like if you believe every flight, every pilot, every passenger deserves the lessons written in blood to be remembered. And share this video, not for numbers, not for clicks, but to honor the 47 souls who never made it home on January 8, 1989. Because every view keeps their story alive, every comment becomes part of their legacy. And every time someone listens, we make sure history never repeats itself. This is not just another crash story. It's a reminder of the thin line between survival and tragedy. So stay with us as we continue to uncover the moments that changed aviation forever.